has a very warm welcome. I feel at home. I feel at ease. And I know that the people I'm talking to here are like me. Hardworking people, people raising their families, people trying to build transparent, better government that is accountable. That's what this type of group has been doing for 10, 50, 20 years. People coming into our community, that's the best part about coming and speaking at groups that are Tea Party-based type groups. To me, you have all led the way over the years as the issues that have come up, and now we, a younger generation, are coming up, having learned from you, having seen how our country is transformed, and now stepping up to fill the role and void to try to bring us back to a place where we can have trust and confidence in elections. A little bit about myself, so those of you who haven't heard me and know who I am. I'm the youngest of 3 children. My parents came from overseas in Europe. First generation Americans, started a family restaurant business in the heart of Chicago. Not uncommon for immigrant families to work and assimilate. Deeply patriotic folks, raised us on work ethic, raised us on a value system, raised us to always strive to be excellent, okay? And I took a lot of those lessons growing up and working in our family restaurant business, meeting and growing with people in my life. I've interacted with all kinds of people, all backgrounds, and that's an asset that I never realized I had. So how did I kind of progress to get to this point? 43 years old, I got 3 kids, 8-year-old, 6-year-old, 2-year-old. I'm living the best part of my life. I jumped into 9/11 after our country was attacked, and I played a role in going overseas to Iraq and Afghanistan. At the time, our country was in desperate need to address those issues. We were pretty unified. We'd say that's pre-Obama years, pre-war, forever wars. We kind of still had this nostalgic view, America was going to take care of itself and live off those core values. Well, what happened was enterprising people came into office, sent us over there, but it was okay because what I got out of that experience was enormous leadership experience. And I wouldn't change doing it over again because the people that I met and I served with built me up into who I am and I believe shaped me to do this role that I'm going to do for you, okay? And so I served in Iraq, Afghanistan with the Ranger Regiment. I came to Ohio for the first time in 2011. And I met my wife from Ohio, Delaware County, which is one of the best things that happened to me. Because my wife kind of helped me, settle into a family life, which is really what I think we all have a desire, not everyone to be that, but it was something that I had yearned for after all the years of going down range, 117 combat missions, doing all the work to try to protect our people from bombs and things of that nature. So we started to go down a path. I got married at that time, had no kids, but then they sent me off to New Mexico. I worked some special operations with the RPA drones and the Predators. I was talking to a gentleman here earlier about that. And that was a great assignment, working with that team. Eventually that led me to the top of the Department of Defense. So I promoted as a lieutenant colonel in 2019, and I served on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is a top-level assignment in the area of force modernization. What is that? We needed to upgrade our information systems and our weapon systems to fight future warfare. The bottom line is we were fighting nation-state third, unconventional warfare. We had degraded our capabilities to fight against larger nation-state actors, China, Russia. And so like the Department of the Pentagon bureaucracies move slow. Whether you're federal government, whether you're the state government, it takes people with serious understanding what's going on and push. So I had to do a lot of that work, but I was able to succeed in that job very well, working for the #2 military official. And that was one of the most rewarding assignments. Most people want to get the heck out of the Pentagon. I enjoyed the Pentagon. And we were able to accomplish a lot of things. And so after that assignment, I came back to Wright-Patterson. For my final assignment, I worked at the headquarters at Air Force Material Command. And so far, nothing about elections, right? So far, this is just to give you an indicator of kind of the path that I've been on in my life. I've always been serving organizations, the needs or the interests of others, and that comes from my youth, right? So that's the type of person. Sometimes it's important to understand who you have running for office, because my values or my conscience, as it's been defined, is something you want to know that somebody's going to do the right thing when it's hard to do the right thing. And politics creates a lot of those difficult situations. With that said, 2020 happened in our country, and I don't think I was more shook than anybody else at any point in my life. You saw a very corruptible election. You saw our country slide again in a direction that looked very authoritarian to me, what my parents described Europe looked like after World War II. And we started to impose edicts upon people through unaccountable public health administrations. The global economic forum types started to come in and dictate terms, and the money started to flow from the federal government into the states. And it seemed like we were captive. It seemed like there was nothing that we could do. And how are we going to get out of it, right? And so my kids were masked up. The military went away from a merit-based system, which really concerned me because the military, if it's not merit-based, I mean, you're talking about life, land, and property. What happens there, right? So I stood up at the time and I fought for religious accommodation requests for military service members because it was our right, and they had created a number of false interpretations of that order that the SecDef gave. And it was a very small percentage of us that stood up for what's right. And I want you to know that I did that, because if I wasn't for that and going through 6 months of hell and mental fatigue and not being able to do my job because I saw people getting thrown out who were combat veterans, who were heroes 10 years prior, but all of a sudden they're zeros because somebody has to dump on them in order to advance their career. Okay? I said something broke here. And I said, when I get out of the military, wherever I go, I'm going to do something about that. I am going to make a difference, whatever community I live in. And so it just happened to be, I knew I was coming back to Ohio. Because once you marry a woman from Ohio, you're not leaving. And that's okay, because I love Midwest values, and we're not stuck-up people. We're very down-to-earth, kind people, and we're very personable. And this area agrees with me. And so when I moved here in 2022, I started to work and meet extraordinary people who were tackling issues of medical freedom. They were tackling issues of better food for us and better care. And then the elections came to mind, and I asked myself, did we need to go down this path? The 4 years that we were, how far we got set back, our borders were flung open. All kinds of people came onto our voter rolls. In the process, when I started to look at that from the county perspective, some things were not meshing, some things were not working. We had a commissioner race where the candidate himself wins the race, but then 2 weeks later, they're still counting and they're still determining who gets what votes, and there's not even an equal representation of Republicans or Democrats. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I can see that this isn't just a Georgia problem or Arizona problem, it's a Montgomery County problem. So I asked the director and Board of Elections intelligently if he would investigate it. And the director didn't want to do that, right? And indicated that it was the candidate that was being dishonest. And I didn't think that for a moment. Because if it was the case, what do? We disprove. You disprove something. You don't have to prove it, you disprove it. So he couldn't disprove it, and I knew. So then I started to work further at the state level. Started to work with people in Columbus. And then I realized I have all of these skills of upgrading information systems. Let's look at the election code. How our Board of Elections positioned to qualify people for eligibility to vote. And I just let my research and my analytic abilities go further, and what I discovered was this. We have 8.1 million voter registrants in Ohio. Every single one of those got onto our voter rolls without having their information qualified for correctness. They were put on the voter rolls based on the fact that they filled out an application. There's no standard in any industry out there in the private sector that does business that way. You have to have your information qualified, and that's the only responsibility of the state to determine eligibility. So then I said, well, out of all of those, how many of those are truly qualified eligible electors? So we started to look at this issue of who was issued these registrations. And we discovered through public records requests that there were over 236,000 non-citizens, which had a right under law to obtain driver's license and identification credentials. And on the surface, that doesn't mean they're voters, it doesn't mean they're registered, but based on the practices that have been put into law the last 3 decades, every person up until June 25th of this year, which just changed because we had fought this a few months ago, so you know, they were being offered an application form because they were an applicant for welfare or for driver's license. So if you think about that, that creates a vulnerability, and that's the way I was taught in the military, to look for threat assessments and vulnerabilities and risk. So I started to bring that to the attention of the Secretary of State in the counties and others, whoever would listen. I went on Jack Windsor, I went on Bob France, Brian Thomas radio shows. And I would bring nothing but the facts, nothing but the data. Hey, this is the data, this should be changed. And then I bring up points. This is not how it's done overseas. Other countries do not do things this loose. We don't throw a ballot in a box outside on the street somewhere and hope that somebody picks it up and that chain of custody is all okay. That's not how it works overseas. People are involved in their vote counting overseas. People use pre-printed, hand-markable paper ballots, and they're under surveillance in the counting process. But over the last 20 years, what's happened to our country is we monetized, or we allowed, I should say, our election systems to be for sale. We didn't even see it happening. I was out trying to help Iraq and Afghanistan become democratic, but here in my own country, the vendors were selling all the voting systems they could that kept us from having visibility into what was happening in our election systems process. And so those voting machines and the ballot marking devices to this day record our votes inside of a barcode or a QR code, which we don't know what our choices ultimately were. And we're supposed to presume you put them in a tabulator, and the tabulator is not flawed from a security standpoint, it's not been tampered with. You're just supposed to trust. I'm old enough to know that there was a president that said, trust but verify. All I want to do for the elections of Ohio is not accuse anybody of fraud, to look at them from a risk threat assessment standpoint. And I want to verify. I want to create processes for us that verify and validate the correctness of information before a person gets issued a voter ID number. That shouldn't be hard. Right now, my biggest resistance point leading up to my candidacy from the Secretary of State was the idea that the Board of Elections should not be involved in that process. That we should have almost just the Secretary of State working with the Bureau of Motor Vehicles to do that. And I'm thinking to myself, how could we say that we have bottom-up elections if our Board of Elections does not have access to citizenship data, does not have access to residency data, does not have access to social security numbers or driver's licenses? They do not have proper verification tools. The Board of Elections do not have authoritative official data. They have not been equipped, ladies and gentlemen, to be successful in that role. But to be fair to them, they've not been asked to be part of that role. They've literally just been asked to input the information and after the fact send out letters to people who have mismatched, misidentified information. Wow, if you think about what a system of plausible deniability, that's the core of the issue, isn't it? Nobody has to be accountable. The director's not accountable, Secretary of State's not accountable, how would we put it, the vendor's not accountable because they've written the contract. They're the ones running the design of the logic and accuracy test. They're the ones advancing the certification of their voting systems. Ladies and gentlemen, when I saw processes like that in the military, I called it a rubber stamp. We don't want a rubber stamp. We want confidence in what we are using for our systems of our election, and I have the solutions for that. So what are some of the things that I want to do as your Secretary of State? First and foremost, the easy thing we could do is we could share official data to the Board of Elections from the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. There's no reason why the Bureau of Motor Vehicles with the official data cannot be given to the Board of Elections, and why the Board of Elections cannot check, because even President Trump's new executive order has called for the sharing of this type of information, death record, social security number information, citizenship information. So we are set up. We have the right president. We just need the right Secretary of State, and we need the right governor. And I believe this is the right time. So 5 months ago, I wasn't thinking of running for any office, because for 2 years I've been a constituent, if you want to call it activist, advocate, in a number of areas. And I thought to myself, well, surely somebody with an integrity and knowledge would be willing to take this platform that I have and go forward. I couldn't find anybody. And eventually people just said, well, you studied it, you seem to have knowledge of it, why don't you go do it? Well, other than the argument of, do you have a gajillion dollars? Do you have the party endorsement? All the conventional things that are said to keep a candidate or keep a candidate that represents you and me and other interests out of the race. And I said, all those rules are out the door. We have a new president. There's a different Republican Party now than there's ever been. This is the time. We have nothing to lose. There won't be another president with this type of focus. What other areas? We don't need 28 days of early in-person voting. Most states don't have that. 1 day, 1 vote. It's very simple. We're overcomplicating it. It costs us a lot of money. I will tell you, the Board of Elections, that's a lot of logistics for them. They don't even like it. Okay? So we created a system, I say this to people, built on voter convenience and ballot accessibility. Those are the priorities of our system today. The priorities that I would move us in, the vision I would have, is security of the voting systems and verifiability of the voter eligibility. We need to flip our priorities. And when we solve for that at the point of registration and voter rolls, then we can have a conversation about how much we're going to accommodate certain groups of voters who are struggling. Now, with that said, there is something that I would do to accommodate key voters. We've had a law on the books since 1977 where it allows valid excuse mail-in ballots. So if you were confined, if you're disabled, if you're not in the precinct, if you're a poll worker, if you're a surgeon performing a procedure, there are exceptions for us to give people the right to vote by mail. And I would do that. I just would not have a no excuse system. I would make it a valid excuse system. So if you think about my plan and approach, we would vote in person, copy of a photo ID, right? But at the same time, there is a portion of our population that can't get there, and we want to ensure that they're not disenfranchised and their civil right is upheld. We would afford them the right to do a valid excuse. To me, that is the best balance for Ohio. That's already the law in 15 different states, and other states are moving in that direction. So that's that. Pre-printed and markable paper ballots, 1 day, 1 person vote. That's obviously going to have to go before the legislature. But as the Secretary of State, I can address the issues of the lack of information sharing and verification tools. I can make the Board of Elections have oversight of that and give them the direction to do that. Let me tell you some other things going on in the state you might find interesting. There are about 10 counties that are collecting signatures out of 88 to do hand counting. Now, I know a lot of people would look at that at face value and say, well, that's a bad idea. I hear it all the time, right? Like, we can't even do a 5% risk limiting audit right now in whatever period of time. And that's simple, because we have a system built a lot around electronic voting machines. And if we were to reevaluate that, establish some guidelines for reporting accuracy, timeliness, and the county chooses to do that, why wouldn't we allow a county the right? There's nothing that prohibits them, and we should try to encourage local public oversight of elections. That's where you have the most transparency. That way, you've got a problem with the Board of Election Director, or they can see that you're part of the process and you're counting perhaps in the polling location. That is the best way to get at the problem, right there on the scene. Once you kick it out to a third-party vendor, everybody feels like wash their hands. They're absolved of it. Nobody has the ability to do or say much because it's all in the legal framework at that point. And that's where we're getting jammed. We're not getting our public records requests. I would make an emphasis on that. So my candidacy be built on transparency, public oversight, and that would lead to accountability. And that's what I think is missing. We have accountability. We will have the ability of people to be more involved. They'll want to come in. I have some other ideas for the youth. People say we don't have enough people that want to come and be poll workers. And I always tell people, well, the reason for that is you haven't given them meaningful work. You come there and you're using these machines, these poll books. I've been a poll worker recently in some regard. And, you know, the third-party vendors running the tabulator, put your thing in, and out you go. One of the things I'd like to see done in our schools in particular, which dovetails with Governor Ramaswamy's proposal to be of 12th graders doing a U.S. civics exam, right? Which is something that anybody like my parents who came into this country had to take. And it's not easy. You gotta learn that stuff. But it's a good thing because that's how you create that connection to the country. And the same has to apply. And what I would do is at the school level, after the election takes place, I would have a mock hand counting drill with teams constructed with the guidelines that are present within the system at the time and let the students participate in that. so that they understand the value and the importance of a democratic process and system. And if you think about that, when they turn 18, they're going to remember certain things. They're going to remember that this is what they did, and this is something that's worthy of their time. We could create within 5-10 years a slew of people. In the meantime, till those young people grow up civically minded, we can ask veterans, law enforcement, judges, those that have been constitutionally bound in every county to participate. I ask any of you, is there any veterans in this room? Okay, so if the county sent you a letter, kind of like and please interact if you wish, but if they sent you a letter, kind of like a jury duty letter, and said, hey, we would like your assistance in participating in this upcoming election to be whatever, a poll worker, a counter, an observer, would you consider doing that for your county?
Yes.
As part of their duty?
Yes.
I am the same way. So why hasn't that letter been sent? The county commissioners can send it. If they can send a letter telling people, excuse me, sir, excuse me, ma'am, your social security number is not matched, which is what they do. They send out 1 million letters like that over the last few years, telling people their information is incorrect. And most people don't respond. So they're allowed to stay in the system and they're allowed to continue voting a regular ballot. That's a problem. But if we were to do that and simply make that instead of a confirmation letter, because we're doing business the proper way up front, validating it, and now we got that, how many volunteers do you think we could generate? I'll give you a better idea. So you do that with the adults. Now you find gifted 8th graders and gifted 12th graders that were participating in your process in the school systems. And now you ask them to be part of that process and you pair them with a mentor. You pair them with a former judge, a former lieutenant colonel, a former fireman. And they're participating together and they're teaching each other how this works. That's the American way. That's the way we work as communities involved. That's what I'm thinking is all attainable, achievable. We just need somebody who's willing to step out of the matrix. That is the political world of electability, because these people who are running for this office, I will tell you this, they are running for this office because they cannot become the governor. They wanted the governor job, but somebody came in who's much more charismatic, much more capable in certain ways, and has taken that. And as a result, the Secretary of State job is like consolation. To me, that's not consolation. That is a hardcore duty. Everything begins and ends at your elections. If your elections are not right, it doesn't matter what position you're in. People will not participate eventually. People will not be part of the process. So it's a cornerstone to the republic. Okay, and that's why I want to be at the forefront of it, because I don't have the confidence that anybody stepping into this role is going to enact the reforms that I'm talking to you about tonight. And I'll answer your questions about what we can do, of course. So that's a little bit about that. Let me tell you how we win this, and let me tell you how I'm doing. Because conventional knowledge would say, there's no way you can win this, right? Because of money, because of name ID, and all those political calculations. Well, you would be surprised, within 6 weeks of having announced my candidacy, going across the state of Ohio to groups everywhere, I raised over $200,000 from 1,600 donors. So I'm not some, Koch brother necessarily, or somebody just one big donor saying, here's, 200,000. Here's $20. I believe in you. I appreciate the fact that you're running for something that you believe in. Because I tell people there's more of us than them. So you tell your friends, and you tell your family, and you contribute in any way you can. I'll take any kind of support. Whether you knock on a door, whether you pass out some literature, whether you donate $10 and buy my sign, that's fine. Because God's guiding this. This is His mission through me. We are all His vehicles. We are all here to be guided for task and purpose. And if it wasn't for people like you, Barbara, hosting this group for many years, and keeping us alive, then we wouldn't have this opportunity to continue to connect in meaningful ways. I honestly believe this country would have been overrun already during COVID. But enough of us stepped up and said, enough is enough. We're not going to be dragged down the mud. Our businesses, our schools closed, our kids masked, and that, my friends, is the power of the American will and perseverance. That is the tradition that I'm proud to be a part of with you. This is why this candidacy is succeeding with energy, enthusiasm, why its message is connecting, because it is authentic. And that's all you need to be at this point to be successful, is authentic in this. And clear of your vision. Because people want leaders. I wanted a leader when I was in the military. I looked up to colonels and generals who took hard decisions. I'm just following in a long line of people who have shown me what it takes. And now I'm stepping up to be that person for you. So help me reach the middle third and win the middle third. I've got the 1/3. That's us. I hope. I hope that's compelling. And I hope you're with me come May 2026 when the primary comes. Okay, many of you have already given so much of your time and resources, and I'm eternally grateful to you. Okay, but when it comes to the middle third, that is resources. And I will raise that by going a lot of places, but it helps when I'm in this environment and with the best groups, the best people who've been fighting for this country, our value system, our state of Ohio, because at the end, we're going to need somebody to defend the election system and strengthen it and address where the issues are. What's good we'll keep, but where we're weak, we'll strengthen it. So I'm privileged to be here with you and the opportunity to speak to you today. I hope I can answer every question, but I'll stick around as long as you like. And of course, it helps that I'm in Washington Township, so I don't have to drive for 3 hours with my campaign manager there, who's a great young man who's come on board and has true heart and is a good person. So that's the key. We want good people of character and conscience to go into government. And with you backing me, we'll be able to accomplish so much. So thank you for the opportunity, Barbara.
Thank you. Okay, we have a plan. Has anybody got a question on a card? Got one back here. Okay, we're going to collect those in a second. I'm going to take, what was it, executive privilege or something?
It's Robert's rules.
I have a couple of questions here. I think it's very important to ask this question, so I hope you don't mind. It's a little bit personal. Okay. John Adams said that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. This group, the main people that come to our MBCR group, we've done quite a few Constitution classes, and so we know our Constitution pretty well. But my question for you is, based on what John Adams said, do you have a spiritual belief?
Your spiritual belief in your faith system, and I call it informed conscience. So when you're faced with a decision, you have to ask yourself, and I believe it's the Holy Spirit that gives you wisdom, right? You have to ask yourself, if I do that, do I create a good? Or is that my action used for evil? So that element is important in thinking about it, because what a lot of politicians do is they rationalize. Well, I voted for that bill because there was some good in it. Well, that's the problem we're going to face. Unfortunately, I'm not a legislator. I'm a Secretary of State, which means as an executive, I'm focused on the election systems and business services administration. Those two areas involve licensing, incorporating licenses, and election administration. So those are the areas that I get to focus on, and I don't get to get mucked up in the legislation side.
Okay. I personally have one more question. Sure. As I said, this group is very interested in the Constitution, and we've done a lot of meetings and videos and going up to the State House regarding, and I talked to you a little bit about this on the phone, Article 5, there's a group that is a lobbyist group trying to get a convention. And how would that affect you? That's what I want to point out. If a convention were called, there's no way to predict that politicians or delegates from all over the country would vote to get rid of our electoral college, our election system, and have a national public vote. So it's an important issue, even though, you know, well, on the top of you think, well, that's not what I'm running for, I'm not.
Right.
So, and you said you weren't really sure about, you know, a convention, so-called convention of states. So would you be willing to talk to a few people who are very versed on it? We have somebody here tonight, and we have a couple others.
I'm happy to, and I've been talking to people across the state in that category that you described. And there is a risk factor that comes with anytime you bring people together. Are those the actual people that will be going, or will the party pick it? Will the rules be changed? All those are valid concerns. Where I was on this and how you look at this, how I look at this issue is, this all came about through the Obama administration.
No, this has been for 60 years.
60 years? Okay, so maybe even further. But
Lily Shapley was a big
okay, yeah,
opponent.
she was right. God rest her soul. But the point is, when I came into this issue, I should maybe rephrase that because I was maybe 20, 25.
Mhm.
It looked like a promising issue at the time because how do you restrain where they were going with Obamacare in 2010? And it seemed like we had lost all power and they had 60 senators in that direction. And so naturally we're all going to look for some protection. But over time, I've only seen 19 states come on board. I believe you need 34 states. And so the question is the issue needed now with President Trump?
We have a great president now.
Right. And so then I'm asking myself, if you have the ability to work toward restraining it with the current capacity, if you rewrite the rules and create the precedent, those are some serious questions like you I'm asking. I don't know the answers to them because some of those are hypotheticals, but it is a worthy thing to be concerned about. And my understanding is it didn't pass the legislature at this time.
Well, they haven't finished having hearings, so it's still there. They never go away. But anyway, if you're willing to talk with some people, I would really appreciate it. And you're here in the area, right?
Yeah, I'm in the area.
When you're free.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, one more question, then I'll go get some cards here. A big part of the job of Secretary of State is to ensure fair and safe elections in every polling place and county. There are directives about pre-planning for emergencies and disasters like what happened in North Carolina. What will you do to ensure counties are prepared for anything?
So what you're referring to is a great question. Emergency action plans are required. All 88 counties, everybody's aware of this, has to have an emergency action plan on file. So for example, if electricity goes out, there's some type of natural disaster, the election has to go on, right? It shouldn't be like what happened to us during COVID where the election was canceled. I would never do that over.
Unconstitutional.
Correct, and nobody acted on it, which is the worst part about it, right? It was allowed to just happen and then, whisk it away under the rug. What I would do is I'd have a review of the emergency action plans. I'd look at specifically what areas, one area I know that is not up to standard or up to snuff is, okay, so your voting machine or your tabulator goes down. How are you gonna hand count it? How are you gonna count it? They don't have that. So that's one area that we would better be positioned to teach some of that. Not saying all 88 counties are gonna do that right off the bat, but emergency action is that type of need for contingency use. And one good thing about being in the military is we always have a first plan, a second plan, a third plan. So from my standpoint, we're always thinking about what to do, how to mitigate, an unforeseen circumstance.
All right, I'm going to go pass your card to your left, and you folks, if you have a card, pass it to your right, and I'm going to come and, you have some already?
Beat you to it.
You have them?
Barbara, that's why I bring him.
He's a great guy.
Yeah, that's why I bring him. He's got to earn his paycheck.
Okay, I'm going to read them, and then you can answer, okay? And if your handwriting is bad, too bad. Okay. How are Board of Election directors put in place? How do you make changes at a county board of elections level?
Who asked so I can address that? Yes, I do. What's your name?
Mary.
Mary. Okay, great question. Board of Election directors are put in place by recommendation of the county chairman of the party to the Secretary of State. And for all intent and purposes, whoever the county chairman's asked for, they usually get it. So every single Board of Election member gets blessed off through county chairman, so it's a very politically appointed position. And now one thing, I don't know if you know this, but it's concerned me about that type of position, is not the fact that there's a Republican and a Democrat. I come to fully expect that. But what happens is the Board of Elections has created a lobbyist association. And that lobbyist association lobbies both Congress and lobbies the state legislature. In my experience, they lobbied against my legislation because it was introducing comprehensive election reforms. So what kind of conflict of interest is that? So you have a Board of Election director, and they serve on in this association, lobbyist group. And then when they want more voting machines, or they want something to push back on, they are asked to write letters to our state reps. So, I mean, if it was you and I, I'm not appointed to anything, maybe you're appointed, I don't know.
I'm an elected official.
You're elected official, so you know this. So the question is, should we have an organization that asks for resources for itself? Maybe that you would say, commissioners do it, others have associations, I agree. But at the same time, in my experience, if there's, let's say, election legislation that is not liked for one reason or the other, what I found is that there was a push and it was sent to have them contact, political appointees contacting the legislature of Ohio. Do you have a point of view on that or perspective since your position of authority?
Well, no, I serve on a local school board, but I'm just wondering, how do you really make change at the county level of Board of Elections? I mean, how do you go about doing that?
I think it's important who you select as the board election director. It is not an easy job. I think a lot of people think, oh, you run 1 or 2 elections a year. I know there's other board of election members in the times. But what happens is the person you set in that role has to be able to grasp the full complexity of that county's election operation. They have to be able to address issues of non-performance, which I don't see us having yet the system of merit or performance. I had that in the military. I don't know where we could address or introduce that into the Board of Elections. That would be one way to qualitatively look at it. You know, for performance, meaning the least amount of infractions or issues, the smoothness on how election occurred, timeliness, the reporting. I think that if we can get to a system like that, that's one way that we can strengthen it. And of course, we hire. I also think if we're underpaying certain Board of Elections, I do think members, not necessarily the directors. I think a lot of them are paid quite well from what I can see. But maybe employees don't receive that much. And I think a lot of the money goes to electronic voting system members and tools. If we didn't have those systems, and I told you some of the issues with those systems on non-verifiability, security risks, they cost a lot of money. The counties have to pay several $1 million to maintain them. What if some of that came away and that went into some of the roles that I was talking about, using official data to qualify eligibility information, paying a little bit more money, $5 more an hour, whatever it is, to a employee? We might attract employees, we might retain employees better, we might build a quality of people there. But those are some of the initial thoughts I have as far as how we
Are
would
they,
train.
are they accountable to the Secretary of State? Who are they accountable to?
Ultimately, yes, they're accountable to the Secretary of State from my impression, but the truth of the matter is it's a hierarchical system like the military. So the director is accountable to the Secretary of State to the extent that they're abiding by directives. And then the employees are accountable to board members,
Oh,
right? Board members, excuse me, misspoke. Board members, and then the director serves in that political appointed role. But I mean, everybody has to work as one in that system. And the rubber meets the road at the Board of Elections. And I'd like to see the Board of Elections empowered. And I'd like to see both the resources, the means, the mandate for them to do some things that they haven't been doing, not because they necessarily don't want to do it, they haven't been required to do it. But we have to adjust certain processes and we have to adjust certain quality controls because we want to ensure that everybody who's eligible to vote has been qualified. And those are the areas I noticed a lot of weakness. Particularly non-citizens have been an issue, although I can't tell you how many are on there because there's no way to know that right now. So it's like a catch-22 for the Secretary of State. The media and others are going to hammer him and that office for that and say, well, you're making that up. No, we just haven't reviewed all 8.1 million records for that because we haven't been given access to the official data. We're just now getting that from the Department of Homeland Security, where a lot of that is. So this is why I think it's important to have somebody right now in that role with that type of intergovernmental background as I do, because I do understand how bureaucracies are working or have worked. I can't say I'm proud of that, but the point is, it helps because, you know, with a large enterprise like the elections, there's so many facets of it that it relies on people at certain levels, as you know, to be key people for it to all work well. And it's not perfection. I think it's our job.
So can I comment on that?
Yeah, I think you're an authority.
Because I am on the Board of Elections in Warren County, and I will tell you,
I'm gonna bring it to you.
yeah. To get on the Board of Elections is a major process, and it is a highly political process, and I really worry about the boards of elections in our various counties, because generally, they are totally not knowledgeable about elections. They're not knowledgeable about voter systems and voting, and it is concerning to me. Now, once they get on the Board of Elections, there's a lot of training and that sort of thing, but it is not very deep. And so I have been to a lot of Board of Elections meetings around the southwest corner, and I will tell you that it's disturbing. So, I will tell you how you do it. You have to get involved in your party. That is the only way, at least right now, unless Marcell can get something different in there. You have to get involved in your party. You have to explain why, if you want to be on the Board of Elections, why you're knowledgeable about that, and beat it like a dead horse. But I feel very honored and thankful that in Warren County, I was elected to be on the Board of Elections, but I'd been trying for a couple of years and it didn't happen quickly.
You persevered.
Yeah.
Can't keep a good man.
Did I answer your question?
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, next question. You still okay with questions? What is your plan for getting rid of the voting machines and/or tabulators?
Fortunately, we have a model for this, and Lucas and Montgomery County already use pre-printed hand markable paper ballots. We happen to be in a county that uses that.
Lucas and where?
Lucas is Toledo.
In Mahoney, is that there? What was
It's
that?
Montgomery.
Oh, Montgomery?
Montgomery. If you noticed, we don't really, to my regard, I don't see a lot of poll workers trained to ask you, would you like a paper ballot? Maybe Julie does. Yeah.
No, they will ask.
They will ask. I've been in different locations. Some ask, some don't. But if you ask, they'll give it to you. They're not gonna. But you can't get that outside of Montgomery in every county. In fact, there's over 40 counties in Ohio that don't offer you that because the electronic ballot marking device and touchscreen produce their own type of a ballot, digital ballot through the touchscreen.
Nonetheless, it's still optional.
What's that?
Nonetheless, it's still optional in Montgomery County.
That is. It's optional, and that's the way you want it. And that's the case with the current system advantage. You want
But
to
it
say,
means nothing as a Montgomery County poll worker.
Right.
It means nothing because then you take the paper ballot and put it in the machine and now it's digital.
so that's a separate conversation. That's a true statement. Your vote will be digitized, okay, for the sake of efficient counting and, you're definitely on a different track. The question, though, I want to stick to the question. Who asked the question about ballot marking? You, sir. What's your name? Larry. Okay. Larry, I don't see anything in Ohio law that requires us to have to use a ballot marking device or a touchscreen. And the reason I tell you that, as somebody who's been a purveyor of reading the code, is we were required to opt in 2010. Opt in is the key term. We were not required. However, with federal grant money that poured in from HAVA, which was a law passed in 2002, it was really easy for secretaries of state over the years to take the money and tell the counties, it's not going to cost you anything. You might as well use it. People will like it. And sure enough, we're people. We adjust to any system. We're Americans. So if you give us something, we just want to exercise our civic duty and go on with our lives. That's 99% of people. Okay? We're probably 1%. Right? We want to ask questions. We want to know how we can do it differently. We want to be a purveyor of our own process. So from what I can tell, what stops me in the first year from issuing a directive that tells every single county, starting in 90 days or 180 days or at the next general election, we will be a pre-printed hand markable paper ballot. If that directive goes out to the county commissioners buy and fund ballots. So from their standpoint, they're already buying ballots. That's already part of taxpayer money. It costs what? $10,000, $10,000, $30,000? I don't know how many ballots you need. In Montgomery, we have 300-some thousand registered voters, right? So it'll be a little bit more. But for me, The amount of money it costs voting machines, not just to buy the initial voting machine, good for about 10 years, but to continue with the maintenance plan, is running into the several of millions. So it's a huge cost savings. And I would answer this question for you, Larry, and I'll go back if you need me to. We're spending $65 million a year on the Secretary of State's budget. Overall, we're buying cybersecurity to protect the voting machines. We put our voting machines on a bond. We called it critical facilities, and we spread the bond out like a bond, like, for critical infrastructure. They said that voting machines are critical infrastructure. A lot of people didn't even know that. So they figured out legally how to get the state to spread the distribution to buy these systems, which I think was brilliant for whoever came up with it. They probably got promoted in Columbus, right? Whether I agree with that or not, I'm kind of joking a little bit, being facetious. But again, with the paper ballots, the pre-printed and markable paper ballots, President Trump has said, decertify voting machines with QR and barcodes. He told the Election Assistance Commission, which is a federal advisory body, decertify by September of 2025. I don't know about anybody here, but I haven't heard a peep from the Secretary of State's office giving out direction to the counties in the event that decertification does go forward. Shouldn't we be prepared in November for our next election? So what I gather from that exercise is it's being ignored. And they're just going along with it until they're told, legally speaking, they can no longer go along with it, and then we'll all react. I don't think that's setting up the County Board of Elections if something happens. And that's not the way I would do business as a Secretary of State. I would look ahead 180 days or plan accordingly 90 days and start us down that path. Now, I would keep tabulators, right? Now, hang on, I'll explain. There's no one at this point right now that is able to count the ballots. We would have to train people, okay, like Monroe County and Seneca that just voted. By the way, Seneca County voted to do hand counting. And they submitted 538 petitions, and they're going to have it as a choice to be made on a November ballot. That is a first time in Ohio that I can recall that a county is actually putting on a petition ballot to get rid of tabulators, counting machines. If you're going to do it and go that route, then it has to be done through the counties. And I'll tell you why. Because if you're the county running the election, you have to have the necessary amount of people, and you have to have the methodology proven to be able to do that. You don't just say one day, we're ending all of this, figure it out. That will create a big problem for the Board of Elections. Am I wrong?
Right.
They have to have a guideline. So what you would do is a use case. You would take a county like Seneca, you would pick an election that's, let's say, relatively not a general election with a lot. And you would give them clear guidelines issued from the Secretary of State. You have to report the vote in this manner, with this timeliness, with this accuracy, give them reporting requirements, and let them demonstrate it. And if they can demonstrate that they have a plan to do that, and they pass the petition ballot, chances are they probably have enough people to be able to hand count. So what I'm saying to you is it has to be systematic. You have to build that part out over time. To Larry's point, the ballot marking devices, the touch screens, that can be more immediate because you have an executive order for President Trump saying that you cannot, if the votes cannot be visually confirmed before they go into the tabulator, then that system should be decertified. So I would also point this out. It took 20 years to build a system of unaccountability through voting machines. It is not going to take 1 year or one Trump or even two Trump presidencies, ladies and gentlemen, which is what is discouraging because a lot of people think President Trump won and their problems are going to go away. No, this is the time to put your foot on the accelerator, which is why I think everybody's still here, right? But this is why we have to tell our friends and family. You think President Trump knows what's going on right now in this county? It's no clue. He doesn't know that in Ohio, the last election, 1 million people cast a ballot by mail-in without a copy of a photo ID. That's a fact. Because we have a voter ID exemption law. And they wrote that in there, Republicans and Democrats, because they argued that it was inconvenient for the older populations to have to do this. Now let me say this. There are people who are in those circumstances. However, you go to a medical office, you can ask your doctor for a copy of it. I wrote a law recently to close that loophole. And it's going to be introduced at some point by a sponsor.
And here's what it says. You're required, regardless of what method you cast your ballot, to show a copy of the photo ID. It's simple. But if you can't go to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles and get your copy, the proposed law says that the Board of Elections will come to your homebound credentialing services. It will assist you, which we're pretty good with that actually in Ohio. The Board of Elections does make a best attempt to go into elder facilities and these type of things to do that. I gotta say, you gotta give credit where credit's due. So that's one aspect of what we're struggling with. It's not just pre-printed and markable ballots aren't fully available. You've got to do these things systematically. That one doesn't require legislation approval or the governor to sign off on a law because the whole enterprise has been given over to the Secretary of State. So now you may be wondering, well, is this starting to make sense why I'm running to be your Secretary of State versus trying to be a legislative proponent on a bill? Because I realized long ago that I'm not going to get us in this direction if I'm not in an executive position to at least move us in this direction. So that was my conclusion. There's no point in doing this and volunteering for 2 more years for nobody to carry the bills. Just be the Secretary of State, right?
Questions that you have already answered, and actually this one does too, which you touched on, but I want to read the second part of it. How do we get the liberal educators, quote unquote, to legitimately reach civics and teach civics and the Constitution? And you did talk about that. So, but the second question, I really don't understand it because I'm not a sports person. The question is, I don't know why it says who, but who is the only professional baseball team in Chicago?
Who asked the question?
Guilty.
Yeah, all right. Well, I got to tell you, I grew up near Wrigley Field.
Right on, you're elected.
All right, there you go. If it was only that easy, right? Yeah, no, I grew up in Upstate.
I was a bleacher bum.
Were you? Did you catch any Andre Dawson home runs?
1960s.
You just lost Ryan Sandberg.
I know.
That was sad. So, for us baseball fans, Ryan Sandberg was my
Ryan Strbich.
role model for second baseman defense. I learned Little League using Ryan Sandberg.
All right, let's go on. The question is, does a photo ID prove citizenship? I thought that only citizens were allowed to vote.
Who asked that? Great question.
There is.
After April of 2023, all driver's licenses and state IDs in Ohio include citizenship markings. That's good news. Your real ID, which is now a requirement to travel, right, as of May, is going to be reciprocal, meaning it is going to also, in the states that have that requirement, Ohio's like 1 of 5 states, so we're doing good with that, has also citizenship markings on your real ID. Here's the problem. How many driver's licenses and state IDs were issued to Ohioans prior to April of 2023? I think we would all say that that's in the millions. How many years is your driver's license or your state ID good for?
8.
8?
That's what I heard.
Okay, I'll buy that. I was going to say 10.
I don't know.
8 years.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
So the law goes into effect in 2023. The geniuses that wrote the law, in order for all of those to cycle over, right? 2023 plus 8 years, the year is now 2031. Until the year 2031, there will be driver's licenses and state IDs out there that can potentially include nonsense. This is why I've been a strong proponent of going back as a Secretary of State and examining the voter rolls and putting it on the counties to do retroactive review of the voter rolls. Not because I presume that there's tens of thousands, but if you want true trust and transparency, you have to do it the right way. You can't say in 8 years it'll all be settled. But that's the way it was written for the sake of making it convenient and easy. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Perfect question. Thank you.
Next question. How would you fund county BOEs for resources to do what you want them to do?
I would look at what money we're spending, which is $12 million on the bond for the electronic ballot marking devices,
And when we convert Larry to a pre-printed and markable system in all 88 counties, I would reallocate portion of that into the needs of the BOEs to look at both personnel costs, but what I would really buy with that, and you saw a state this week do it, Mississippi, I would buy the ability to access official data so that you could check credit score agency information. We would get eligibility for residency and identity. I put that in a bill last year, and the bill didn't go anywhere. And what's funny is they actually took that idea, not because of me, separately, they figured it out. And now Mississippi's the first state in the country, the gold standard, as we call it, is the first state in the country to now use credit score services, commercial identity validation is what it's called, to check for the correctness of information. We could do the same thing in Ohio, and I would push for that pretty quickly.
Okay, can you take two more?
Of course,
You okay with that?
as long as people haven't left.
They've been good.
Yeah.
Okay, those opposing the system of voting on one particular day, one vote, no early voting, will focus on the fact that you are disenfranchising certain minorities from voting. How will you answer that? It will need to be a focus for your campaign, is the suggestion that they said here.
Who asked the question? Yeah, Angela. We're always going to take an accusation of that. Voting's two sides of the coin. You don't want to disenfranchise a voter, but yet you don't want to dilute a vote. Okay? With regards to, I was talking about earlier how I would keep mail-in ballots for valid excuses and keep that in early voting process. That mitigates some of that argument. But this idea, and what I would charge back at people who try to insinuate some type of a racist or some term about this, is I would say, what? You don't believe that some person from an identity group is not capable of going out and getting a basic ID? That's pretty degrading. I don't think anybody would want to be put into that category and presumed that they don't have the capability to do that. So all you have to do is push right back at that. Unfortunately, my upbringing and where I grew up, that's not a hard thing for me to do. That way, if you can't tell my personality. But yes, I'm going to be accused of that. But again, I look at people of all backgrounds as equally capable. As long as you create equal conditions for people, that's what this country's built on. The cream will rise to the top. And you've seen people successfully navigate the voting enterprise for decades coming into it. I find that people who just came from overseas are some of the most civically smartest minded people about our country. And there's a lot we can learn from some of that. I'm not speaking per se here. I think this group is informed adequately on that. What I'm saying is when you talk about general population, you'd be surprised because for them it's a point of pride to be in this country. They struggled wherever they were. They came here for their reasons. So that resonates with me because of my family. But I mean, I think that's the way I would approach it, is I would go right back with the question, what, you don't think that they're capable enough to figure it out? What does that say about them? It doesn't say anything about me. Go ahead.
Okay?
The problem with that is that the politics that prevents a certain group of people from going out and gathering ballots. I mean, the politics of it are going to be at the heart and soul of that argument.
The good news of being an outside political candidate that wants this job and is not looking for a political career is I'm not worried like the guy who has to want this job as a consolation because he's term limited,
Sure.
right? And so he's worried, am I going to lose independence? Am I going to have an opportunity to be a governor if I take that position? I don't have that concern. I'm looking at it with the laser focus. How do I defend in the integrity of the election system? How are we going to do that in a way that's fair for everybody? That's it. And that's the best part about not putting my career ambition and my electability above what we need to do for the job. And that's why it's easy for me to say it, because I believe that.
Okay, some somewhat nosy questions, I guess. Sorry who wrote it. What is your wife's name? What grade school, high school, and university did you attend? And where did you do basic ranger school?
Yeah, training from
Did you go through ROTC?
Yes. Okay. My wife's name is Nicole.
Marshall is Mrs. Strbich.
Call it that. That's not been an easy name to pick up for her.
No, it's not easy
No.
name to spell.
Right, so she had a nicer name, as German, right? She's Ohio, so Tyson. So much nicer. But, when you love somebody, you sacrifice for them. So she sacrificed, she didn't do the whole slash. Tyson
She has to
slash
correct,
Strbich.
she has to
She had a
correct
right-
everybody when they
Right.
spell your name wrong.
Yeah, so no, I mean, she's worked here in the community, so she graduated Wright State. I graduated Indiana University at the ROTC program. I went to a detachment, I did ROTC. I tried to get into the academy. Could you believe it? My math scores were not up to par. I wanted to blame it on my seventh grade teacher. I had a bad year, and so I couldn't get in the academy, but I had 2 nominations. Do you know who nominated me to go to the academy? Does anybody know the name Rod Blagojevich? With the hair, the one that served time in presidential party. Well, he was my congressman. This is why I guess I was destined to try to oversee elections because I saw such terrible elections in Chicago. That I feel like I've been, run over by that, and I feel like I can't ever allow something like that to happen here in Ohio. But yes, I attended ROTC, and wife's name is Nicole, 3 kids. She's well put together. She's not as outgoing as I am, so she doesn't really. I mean, she was kind of like, "You want me to go to this or that kind of thing?" And I'm like, "If you can, please." And she's like, "I would prefer you do that for now." So but she is supporting me. She was with me for 10 years. She had to work remotely in financial planning, and that's not easy. She has her own career. She's her own person. Her parents raised her to be a strong, independent woman, and. I guess that's what I'm attracted to, right? Because you marry who you're attracted to. So, a little bit about me.
Thank you for taking the time to answer these questions.
Well, when I went to Intel
Be out in the
school,
lobby for a few minutes?
I will, hang on. Yeah, the Ranger assignment, I just embedded with the Rangers. I deployed with them. I didn't go to Ranger school. I was a augmentee because they needed people. They were surging in Afghanistan. So, I raised my hand and I said, "This sounds a lot better than Germany. Let's go to Afghanistan."
Okay.